A decade of economic and political progress in Africa is now under threat, and any improvements in African governance is practically flatlined. That is the warning from the most recent edition of the Mo Ibrahim Index of African Governance. According to the 2022 report, this worsening governance situation reflects a series of disruptions caused by a combination of the COVID-19 pandemic, increased insecurity, as you can see in the Sahel, for example, and widespread democratic backsliding. The report is also warning that unless nations quickly address this trend, Africa as a whole will be unable to reach either the SDGs, much less the AU's Agenda 2063 goals in time. My colleague Uche Okoronkwo delved into these issues with Pascal Lamy, the president of the Paris Peace Forum and a member of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation board. You probably know him better as a former Director General of the World Trade Organization. She started by asking him whether these events amplified problems that already existed or if governance across the continent has just gotten a lot worse.
What we believe is that economic and social insecurity is driven by internal and external forces. If people are less well off, if poverty increases in certain regions, this is a cause for resentment and for political instability, plus external tensions. And we all know that the Sahel region is now much more insecure than it was 10 or 20 years ago because of Islamist fundamentalism in some countries, because of tensions between great powers finding their expression on African soil. So it's a mix of economic issues, and certainly the COVID has hit very hard many poor countries that do not have, like rich countries, the capacity to borrow at a very low rate, yes, to cushion and buffer the economic impact of COVID on the populations. So it's a mix of factors, some of a domestic nature, others from a more global and international nature.
Of course, there are some bright spots that you pointed to as well. You talked about infrastructural development, improved equality for women as well, and advances in sectors such as health, education, and environmental sustainability. What for you are the factors that show that Africa has made some progress, especially when it comes to governance?
Well, as you may know, our index of governance is a compendium, a synthesis, a sum of 350 different smaller measures of smaller evolutions. What you say is absolutely true, and we've had this steady, but slow, but steady improvement in the compartments you just mentioned, infrastructures, education, women's rights in many countries, and this is to be expected from the increase in economic development and in many ways surprisingly efflorescent African entrepreneurialism, the capacity of Africans to take economic initiatives, to build new enterprises in the area of goods and services, or in health, or in various care-related issues, is sometimes extremely impressive, while we know that there are also sort of Shebel Korean-like big Pan-African companies that are now driving part of the economic development in Africa.
Well, speaking about the future, you referred to the fact that as a result of globalization, we're seeing Africa more connected, but also more susceptible to the geopolitical changes that we're going through now. We're suddenly living in a strange new world. And that's interesting because that's the title of your book, A Strange New World. So I'd love to get your take. When you look at the shifting political and economic winds right now, where do you see Africa's position, especially in light of technological changes, environmental factors, and also geopolitical developments going forward?
Well, I think one thing is for sure, Africa will matter more on this planet in the decades to come than in the past. And this is mainly due to the increase in the population and the sort of ship race which we have in Africa between demographic development and economic development will determine the fate not only of the African continent but also on others, like for instance the European one, which is geographically the nearest to Africa. And we know that there is a perspiration between Africa and Europe and the other way around, which matters a lot. Now, as far as environment is concerned, Africa is in the same boat as everybody, except that the African continent has very little responsibility in global warming, whereas the African continent will be one of the main victims of global warming. So there is a tension there between the North and the South, the traces of which we've seen on this debate about loss and damage that started for good, in my view.